Hey everyone, this is my Xamarin tutorial episode 2. In this episode, we're going to be looking at how to connect our application to SQLite and see what interesting things we can do. We're going to be updating, creating, deleting, and inserting. If you haven't seen the previous episode where we set up our application, which is just a basic login screen, please go ahead and check it out. You can also download the code for this episode as well as the previous episode from my GitHub. The link is right below. So let's get started. So let's do a quick recap of what we've done before. Let's launch our app. So, same place we left it as before. We can input our name, put in our password, and click submit. This is as far as we got last time. So let's improve on this. I'm going to exit out of this. And just going to minimize it here. So as I mentioned before, we have the portable here, and we have the Android, and also the iOS and the Windows platform. But we're going to be focusing mainly on these two. Okay, so let's start with, we need our user to be able to log in. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a new folder. So if you didn't see what I did, I went to our portable, I right-clicked, I said add, new folder, and we're gonna call this models. Here we're gonna, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all our models in here. So for example, we need a user model. So now let's create a class again, another class. We're gonna call it user model. Click OK. We'll make this public. So what does a user need? So a user obviously has a first name, a last name. But in this case, we're just going to use the username, the password, and we're also going to do an ID, okay? So we're going to do, this is a quick shortcut. So if you type in prop and then tap it, you get the template for a property. So the first one's going to be ID. If we want, we can type it out as well. Public string username get set. But I personally prefer the prop tap. Quick little shortcut there, huh? This will be also a string and password word. Oops, 2 W's. Word. There we go. We're going to save that. We're going to go back to here. Let's see, how do we want to handle this? So every time the person clicks submit, we're actually going to create a user model. So let's create a new user model. So user model. We have the red little line there, but we know it exists. So if we hold down Control, period, we'll get the suggestions. So let's do use model. There you go. As you can see, it's been added up here as well. That's also another little shortcut. User equals new user. And then we're going to add the values that are being sent over. So that will be user dot property. We want the username equals txt username dot text. User dot password equals txt. Oops, nope. I tried compiling it. Well, we'll get an error, so it's not going to get very far. Let's do txt password Dixie password. That's what happens when your fingers just kind of slip. And it didn't like this, so let's see, txt password. There we go. So this sounds fine and dandy, but what happens if the person trying to log in tries to log in without putting a username or a password? Shouldn't we kind of let them know, hey, listen, there is no values here, so let's do a little bit of validation. So let's create a method called validation. I'm going to send it over the user. Again, you see there's a little red line. We can actually do the control and the period and say generate the method. As you can see, it generates a method for us. We actually want to return a bool because we're just going to check if whatever is sending over, if there's actual values there. And then we'll figure out what we can do with that. So we'll say turn false. It's there because I don't like the little red line. And we'll say if user dot. Actually, let's do this. String dot is null or empty. And then we'll say user dot username dot toString. Just my own little habits of making sure it's a string. And then we'll return false. So if it's that, then we turn false. Else if string dot is null, user dot password dot toString, return false, and then we'll just default this one to true. Okay. So now we have a return here. So if it comes back here, we want the value. So let's call it bool and say is valid. Okay, so if, you can type in the if and then tap 2 times, is valid. So if it's true, is valid. There we go. Sorry, I just saw the little red line and it threw me off a little bit. We want to do something else. We want to do something else. Oops. So if it's true, let's just keep this up here. Everything is valid and everything's good to go. If not, then, let's go to our UI and see what we can do there. So here, we're actually going to add something. We're going to add a label. We're going to give it a name, just like we did. Oops. Give it a name. Doesn't want to cooperate. X. Name. LBL. LBL. Validation. And we'll leave that empty. And that's it right there, like that. So we're going to use this. So if something is wrong, if there's an error, it's going to come back. It's going to just dump it here. Just say, hey, that's not what we want to do. We could also use an alert if we want to, but I think this way it's a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer. So we're going to say LBL validation.text equals please input proper user name and password. Or actually, I don't like this. No, actually, let's just leave it. It's just a message anyways. So let's run it. Let's compile it, see what happens. Let's open this up and let's wait for it to compile. There we go, we're going. So let's just send an empty one. I didn't like it. What happened? So we got an exception. I wonder what's going on here. So let's put it here. Let's run it again, and let's debug this error. Clicked it there. I think I know what the error is. I can't change it into a string if it's nothing. So let's see. It's a null value, and that's where the error is. So, hey, you know what? Everybody makes mistakes. It's a pretty foolish mistake. But let's grab this and just say user.username equals null. User.password. Oh, geez. Password equals null. And let's run it again. So we're just waiting for it to compile so we can test out the little bit of code that we've put in. So let's try and submit. We're at the breakpoint. It's null. It will return. There we go. And let's see, did we get our beautiful? Yep, please input proper username and password. Okay. Let's relaunch this. I'm just relaunching it just to clear out the error at the bottom so we can try just with one of them, I guess. So we'll put John and hit submit. I'm just gonna F5 it just to go quickly. Let's see if we got it here. Yep, and we got the error. Now let's see if we put in both and click submit. Now let's step through this. Actually, step out, see what happens. It's looking good. Let's see if we get that screen. Great, so I went through. Okay, so we're making progress. Let's close this down again. So now that we sort of have some level of implementation in, let's start on the SQLite part. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go right here to the very top, to the solution. We're going to right click and say manage nugget package for solution. We'll click on that. We're going to go to browse and we're going to put sqlite lite.net PCL. And we are going to grab this one here. Over on this side, we're going to select all of them. So all of them also get the reference. And we're going to click install. This might take a little bit, so I'm actually going to pause the video. We got do you accept? Yes, I accept. Great, and everything is completed. So let's close that. And let me close that while I'm here as well. And save everything. Great, so everything looks good. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an interface here. So I'm actually going to create a new folder, add, new folder. I'm just going to call it interface. And inside of there, I'm going to actually add the actual interface itself. So add new item. I'm going to look for interface. And here we're going to call it SQLite. So we have our interface here. We're going to make it public. It's just going to have one method. It's going to be the connection method. We're going to be using this interface to actually be able to access SQL because we're not actually able to access SQL directly from the portable. Each application, so the Android or the iOS, has their own access to the SQL. So basically their own path to the actual SQL database. So let's do that here. So SQLite connection. We're going to do the control little dot, and then we go using SQLite. Nice. And we'll get connection. Looking fabulous. Next thing we're going to do is go to the Android. Go to the Android, and we're actually going to create a new folder here as well. Add new folder. We'll call it SQLite connection. And we're going to hyphen it Android. In here, we're going to add a new item, or actually a new class. This class is going to be, let's call it SQLite connection. Let's give a second for my computer to catch up. There we go. We're going to make this public, and this is going to inherit from the from our interface, which is right here, the iSQLite. Again, I just press Control and the little period, iSQLite. So now we got the using statement, but we still have the red little line. So we, again, Control and the little button, and then implement interface. So we have the interface here. So here we're going to need a few things before we can kind of move forward. The first thing is we're going to need a, let's see, database name, a database path, and a return of SQLite connection. So a return of this basically. So let's start with the first thing, okay? So we're going to say string SQLite SQLite file name, actually no, database DB name equals, let's call it DB Xamarin app demo, and we'll DB3. Now the path string, let's call it document path equals system dot environment dot get folder path, system dot environment dot special folder dot personal. Okay, now we got these two things. We actually got to combine them together. So let's just put a little header here, combining, and we'll say var path equals path, path, using system.io dot combine, and we'll say the document path combined with the SQL, like, actually let's rename this. If I hit Control and R, I can actually rename it. Oops. There we go. Great. So we have that. But now this whole thing about returning a connection. So what we're going to actually do is, let me see how we're going to do this. We'll just create a new connection here. We'll call it SQLite connection. I'll call it con equals new SQLite connection. We'll give it the path and return the connection. Now, we need to add a couple of assemblies here for this to actually work. So square bracket, assembly, and then again, control little dot. Oh, that's why I put it in the wrong place. Right here. Let me add some space there. Why is my assembly not liking me right now? Okay, there we go. Assembly, xamarin.forms dependency, type of SQL, and here we gotta use the name of the actual SQLite. The actual SQLite, of the actual of this here. No, that's not it. Of the actual class. Sorry, so we gotta use this. There we go. That seems to be a-okay. We'll save that. So yeah, so just to recap, basically I created an interface. The interface has a get connection. Then inside of Xamarin, I created a folder with SQLite connection. It's right here. This class inherits from iSQLite. And here I created basically the database name, the path, I combine them, and then I'm returning this. Seems pretty straightforward. So let's close this. Let's close this. And let's go to our user model. In the user model, we're going to do a couple of things just so that it understands what we're doing. So we're going to actually tell it it's a table and give it a table name. Let's call it users table. We're going to do the control little dot use SQLite. Perfect. Next thing, is we need to let it know what the primary key is. In this case is the ID. So primary key. What is the column name? Column ID. And we want this to auto increment. Oops, I like to keep them together. Then the next one, we'll give it the column name as well. Give this one a column name. Oops. Password. We'll save that. It meets all the requirements that we need. So let's continue on. I know we've written a little bit of code. We haven't actually tested any of this stuff out. But we are getting there slowly but surely. We're getting there, so stick around, okay? We're gonna go back up here to the portable part of the application. At this point, we're gonna create a new folder, and we'll call it DAL, Data Access Layer. And I'm also gonna create another folder called Helpers. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to work on the helper before we get to the data access layer, which is where all the connections and where all the CRUD, all the create, read, update, and delete happens. So we're going to create this helper class. We're going to right click and say add new class. And we'll call this SQL. Let's see, what can we call it? What would be a good name for this class? SQL connector. SQL connector. We'll make it public. We also don't want to instantiate new copies of this class, so it's just going to be a static class, static. In here, we're going to have a get connection. So we'll say public static SQLite connection control period SQLite connection get connection. And we are going to start working on basically getting a copy of SQL from the application itself, okay? So we're gonna say var connection equals dependency service. My fingers aren't working with me today. .get. And here we're going to use the interface that we created earlier, iSQLite, I believe it was called. We'll check in a minute if it's not here. There we go, it was there, iSQLite. And then get connection. And then here, basically, we get this connection and we got to create the table. If the table is not there, we're going to create it. If it is there, we basically just leave it alone, okay? So we go connection dot create table. We pass our user model. Then we return the connection. It's looking very good, Okay, so moving on. It's looking good. So we're gonna go here into the DAL, so the data access layer. We're gonna right click and add a new class. This class, we're gonna call it user repository. So anything that's related to the user, should be written in this class. So anything that's related to the user that involves accessing the database and manipulating the database to some extent. And so we'll call it user repository and click OK. We'll make this public. Static. And then let's do our first exercise of basically just seeing if we get anything from the database. So public static. I'm actually going to use a return type of task, and then user model. And get all. Before I forget, we actually need to put in a button just for the first time so we can actually get a user in. Typically, you wouldn't do it this way. You'd have some kind of, registration process, but we're not going to go through that. We're just going to put in a user and confirm that password. But you know what? Let's just finish this. Let's finish this method, and then we'll move on to that part. Okay. So let's since there could be multiples of user models, let's do a list user models, list of users equals null using, and then tap var connection equals let's see, what was the helper called? SQL connector dot get connection. So right now we're just getting a connection that we created back here. We're getting this connection. Oops. Getting this connection. We're still under user repository. So let's get that of users equals connection dot table type user model. Oops, my fingers are all over the place today. I really don't know what's going on. Well, I do know what's going on. I'm not at work. I actually use a different keyboard, and this keyboard is not normally my normal keyboard. I know it sounds kind of weird, but it makes a huge difference. I find that the keys are a lot closer together. Anyways, so we got to return this task from results, and we are returning the list of users. Why is it not? It's not liking it. Let's see, any suggestions? Oh, right. I'm actually returning a list, so it should be list. Let's do this. List that, and here. There we go. That got rid of the little squiggly red lines. Great. It's looking good. So let's see what happens. Let's just run it just to see if we get any errors, and if we do, then we can address them at that point. Here's my MobiZen casting. Sorry, let me open up again. Let's wait for it to compile. Hopefully we don't get any errors. Let's keep our fingers crossed. This development, it can be frustrating at times. It's you got to have a lot of willpower and persistence. Just waiting. We're still here waiting. Maybe I should pause it a little bit. Nope. Okay, great. It uninstalled the previous version of the app. You'll see the icon pop back up again, hopefully. That usually means it's being compiled. We are getting that it's connected to the phone. The icon popped up again. Yay, it's up. So let's do this. So we've gotten this far. So it's looking good. It's no compile errors, basically. Nothing to really show. But like I was saying, we're actually gonna stick in a, let's see if I can open up again. We're gonna stick another button here, say, call it add user. And we're just gonna add one user just to have something to look at. We're actually gonna go to the repository because we're gonna use that to actually add the new user. And then go from there. So let's minimize this. We'll stop this. And now let's create another method called public static. This method is basically to add a user. So what would you need to add a user? We're actually going to return a bool, again using task. We're going to call this add user. If you're adding a user, what do you need? A user. So user. Again, we got to do the using. It's pretty repetitive, this portion. So we're going to say using tap, just so we can get the template out. Var _ connection equals SQL connector dot get connection. So we got our connection. The next thing we want to do is connection dot insert, and we're going to insert our user. Here we're going to do return task from results. So if it's done, we're going to return true. Oops, true. So at this point, realistically, we don't have anything. Let's go to our main here, and let's add that extra button that we were just talking about. I'm feeling lazy, so I'm just gonna select it, copy it, paste it. We're gonna rename this add user, add user, equals new event. So we got our event there. We're gonna go F12. So this is basically just to add a user. So we're gonna say user model user equals new user model there. And I'm just gonna add it here. So we're gonna say user name equals John, password equals 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Then very easily we can add our user. We're gonna say user repository. Remember our repository, we're gonna call that because we are actually putting something in to the database. User repository dot add user, and we're gonna send over the user. And you know what? I just want to know that it's done what it's supposed to do. Oops. So let's add a display alert, title confirmation. You added a user. This is our message and our button. Okay. Like I said, this is just for the project itself. If you wanted to do it differently, you would actually set it up so you would be putting in some kind of, hey, it's your first time logging in or your first time running this application. Please register and put in a username and password. But we're not going to do that. This is just a quick way of getting things going for us. So let's run it. Let's see where we're at with this. I'm actually going to put a breakpoint there. Hopefully everything compiles. And we're off to the races. We got our little add user button. We're going to click it. We got our breakpoint. Let's see what it does. Came here. We have our user here, which has all our data. It did it, returned, came back, and we have you added a user. Great. So in theory, we've added somebody there. Okay, so but how do we know we actually added someone? If you're like me, I come from a SQL Server background, so I'm accustomed to being able to, to go to the SQL Server Manager and see my tables and all that sort of stuff. There is things like that that you can use, but in this case, we're not going to get into that. That's another area. What we're going to do now is we're actually going to use that get all to see what's there. So let's go, let's see. The validation, if it's valid, let's just put it in here for the sake of putting something in. Let me stop it so I can actually type into it. I'm gonna say user repository dot get all. I'm gonna put the breakpoint here. I just want to see what we're gonna get. Let's run it. Basically, I'm just doing some testing, some checking. Ideally, when you're working, you're always checking your code. You don't want to write thousands of lines without confirming that everything is working as expected. So we're back here. So I'm just going to click the submit button because that's where that action is. It went to the valid. I'm just going to F5 it. So we get here. I'm going to step into it. So it's creating a null. It gets its connection. It gets its list. Oh, and look at that. Now our list has 1. Let's open that. Look at that. We actually have values in our database. That is great. So if we F5 it, our application is working well. I mean, we get this because obviously we had the validation before that. But at this point, we can say that we are storing things to the database, which is great. So let's go back here, or actually let's go back to our repository. So at this point, we have the get all, we have the add user. Now, let's see, we would need the delete. We need, we're not going to do an update. We need to be able to get 1, the validation. We'll call it the validation. Validation. I think the validation is the most important one at this point. So let's see how we're going to do that. So this will be pretty straightforward. So we're going to create a new method, call it public static. Again, we're going to create a task, return a bool, and we're going to call this is authorized. And this is going to actually take a user. So user model. Okay. So we're going to say bool is authorized equals false. We're just defaulting it to false. We're going to grab whatever gets sent here and put it into variables, because I find that when we use Lambda, It's very finicky. We're actually going to be using Lambda. That's how we pull a lot of the data, or we push the data in. So string username equals user dot username, string password equals user dot password. Okay. Now we got to go through the whole process of connecting to the database using, so var underscore connection equals SQL connector dot get connection. It's looking marvelous. Oops. Space. Then we're gonna say I'm gonna get our connection, and then we're gonna grab the table. Grab the table. The table is user model. And then there, when we grab the whole table, we're going to say, well, I need a count. Basically, because if this exists, then they're there. If there's a count of these values, then therefore it must be there. So we'll say dot where. We'll say user name, username. So if you don't know Lambda, this is basically like a variable, and we're going to use that variable that gives us access to the actual properties equals username. So I'm saying, so in this table, okay, I want you to look for the property username, but I'm passing it here as a variable, and I'm comparing it to this, which is up here. Okay, so hopefully it's not too confusing. And then we need another where, because I mean, there could be multiple users that used John, and then we need to compare the password. So password equals user dot password. Okay. Oh, what am I doing? Actually, it's not aware. Oh, sorry, let's remove this here. It's end. Actually, let me rewrite this here. Let me rewrite this, and we'll say user. Let's do this. This is going to get a little confusing for everybody, so let's just call this user. Let me see if it lets me do that, because no, because our variable is called user var. We'll call it user var. Okay, so we can distinguish them. We're gonna end it here, and then we're gonna say user var dot password equals our password dot count, and then we're gonna put this in a int. We'll call it return values equals. So basically, this is going to return a count of anything that it finds. And then we're just going to write a little quick if statement. If return value is greater than 0, is authorized equals true. Out here, we're going to say return task dot from results is authorized. It's looking great. It's looking great. So basically, this is just a recap. we're trying to see if a user is authorized to move forward. At this point, we created a bool is authorized just to move around values. In this method, we're receiving a user. So because Lambda is kind of finicky, we are actually going to dump those values that are inside of user and put them into our own variables of type string. So a user and a password. Here we're connecting. We grab our connection, we grab the database, and we say, give me these things. We're using something called Lambda. If you're familiar with that, look it up. I can also make a quick tutorial on it. Let me know below. And we're saying this, we're calling a random variable called user var. So you can grab values in there. And then saying var.username. So I'm inside of the table in a row, and I'm saying, get me the field called username, and I'm comparing it against mine here, and then the same thing for the password. If at any point it finds something, it increments it and it calls it and it adds it into the count. And then when it's done its little magic, it'll give me a return value. If the return value is greater than 0, meaning it did find something, then it is authorized. Else, it'll just continue using its default, which is false. Pretty straightforward. Now let's go back to our main page. We're going to actually remove this here because we don't need it. Let's see, it does its little validation here. After it does its validation, we're actually going to do, we're going to use our user repository, and we're going to say is authorized. We're going to send it the user, which has been qualified as having valid data. And here it's var return value. So let's see what happens. So this is going to return a task. So I'll return a task, and then we'll address it from there. I'll show you how to grab the values from the task as well. Let's run it. It's opening up. So let's say John 1, 2, 3, submit. I forgot to put a breakpoint, so I'm gonna actually put a breakpoint there now. I'm just gonna F5 it because I know it's a valid, it has all the information. Let's step into it. As you can see, we have the user that we created. I got the name, the password, it's right there. We're going to get our connection. It's going to do its little magic. It's going to check if this user exists. It did its magic. It gave me a 0 because the user name exists, but the password is wrong. Remember, the password is 1234. So return. So it returns something here. It returns a task. So let's just run it. Let's finish running it, and then I'll show you how to get the results from the task. So we're going to stop it. Remove it. We're going to say task bool return results. I don't want to put the var in there. I could have, but this just makes it a little bit easier. We're going to create an if statement, if, and then return results dot results. That's how we're going to get the results. You'll see shortly. If it is valid, if it does exist, we're going to pop this up. Else, let's send it to the validation text. This is, text. You are not able to access. And let's run it. Okay, so let's run the first one, John 1, 2, 3, submit. It does its validation. It gets here, comes in here. Let's pop out of this one. Result. See, result is false. These are the values inside of the result of the return value, but we want this. It's not valid. You are not able to access. So let's put in the proper password. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I believe this was with capital JOHN. Now let's click submit. F5. I'm actually going to stop it right here. Okay, we're back here. Results. Let's see. The result says it's true. And voila, we're in. So I mean, the ideal thing would be the next one. We would actually, navigate to a new page and continue our application. Let's just click OK. And one last thing, how do we delete users? So let's go back to our user repository. So to delete users, let's see. We're going to say public static task pool delete user. We're going to get a user model, user. We are going to, are using statement var connection equals SQL connector. Oops, SQL connector, get connection. So we're gonna have to do a variety of things here first, right? Because I mean, for example, we're sending over, let's say we want to delete the John user. When we send over the John user, we won't have their ID number, which realistically is what we'll be using to delete, because there's no way of duplicating that ID number, right? So we're gonna have to first check if that user exists. If it does exist, grab that user and then delete it. So we're gonna do that by saying, let's do this. Let me open this up, see if we can pull some of this code here. So I just grab some of the code up here. And then here, let's make our user name equals user.username, string password equals user.password. And then we're just working through it. Okay, so that's good. And then here, we're going to change this to first or default. So that will return one value. And it'll be a user model, user return. And then here we're going to say if user return is not equal null, then underscore action dot. Let's see how this delete works. I'm assuming it must work similar to the add. I'm not 100% sure. Let me do a little bit of Stack Overflow. Okay, so I got here the Stack Overflow, and actually I'm doing a lot more work than I need to. So that's the part that we need. So let me just grab that. I'm actually going to remove this here. And we are going to say connect dot table user model dot delete where user bar dot user name. Oops. Equals there we go. And then we're going to return task dot result from results true. Jeez. True. So let's see, how can we do this deleting functionality? Let's add another user, and then we'll add a delete button. So actually, let's add the delete button first. btn, btn. And let's go to the code behind, and we'll say user repository dot delete user. And I'm just gonna hard code some values here. We'll say user model user equals new user. I'm gonna make a Steve user. User equals Steve, and password equals 2345, and then we're going to send this the user. The only thing is that we currently don't have Steve in our thing, so let's add another user called Steve. So let's just grab this one that's already there existing, and we'll say Steve. 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to add it, and then up here, okay, where user repository dot I'm actually going to delete all the breakpoints, delete all breakpoints. Yes. I'm just going to put it here. So let's run it. Let's keep our fingers crossed. I wasn't too sure what was the process for this, but I feel fairly confident. So we have the additional button there. You can see delete users. So let's try John 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops. This has to be capital J. Submit. Let's see what we get here. We have one. Steve doesn't exist yet. And we're still able to log in. Great. So now let's add a user. I added a user. Now let's do the submit again. We have two. So the second one should be Steve and the first one's John. Wonderful. We can confirm that Steve works by Steve 2, 3, 4, 5. Oops. I think it was 2, 3, 4, 5. Submit. Okay, and Steve can now get in. Now let's do the delete. And let's do the submit. Let's see if it did its magic. And we only have one. Hey, it worked like a charm. So click F5. We try, let's see if Steve is in there. Steve's not there. John 1, 2, 3, 4. Submit. And John's in there. Great, we've made some really good progress. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you have any questions, please feel free to hit me up in the comments below. I'm always checking. If you like this tutorial or any other of my tutorials, please subscribe. It will be much appreciated. I'm always looking for any feedback, positive or negative. Everybody has something to say. It's not a problem. Anyways, till the next tutorial, see you then.